Welcome to week 2 of Biological and Earth and Space Sciences. Just a little note before we get started this week. We're going to try something a little bit different. Our topic this week is curriculum design. So we're going to try a little bit of redesign. So the first thing I'm going to do this week is actually run through the lecture slides and talk a little bit about the content. I will post that then as a lecture for you guys to have a look at. And consider before we come together on Wednesday between 10 and 11 in a Zoom session to discuss anything that might arise from this particular week's work. Curriculum design is a fairly deep topic and a fairly rich one. And when we look at slide 3.1 taken from your textbook, you can see that the ACS is actually the overriding curriculum document. Underneath it is the strands, the science understanding, science as a human endeavour, science inquiry skills. And then we look at the areas, the biological sciences, chemical, earth and space, physical sciences, and of course the inquiry elements, nature and development of science, use and influence of science, questioning and predicting, the first of the processes, planning and conducting, processing and analysing, evaluating and communicating. So we can see this curriculum document is a little bit like a recipe. And this brings us to our first slide, really, our induction and our overview. And when we look at what the curriculum is, we can actually turn our mind to our subject homepage. And we can see there that, diagram 3.1, the definition given for curriculum is on page 58 of your textbook. But it's an official statement, and we can see just how official it is. The Australian Curriculum Science, of course, from the Howard government in 2010, implemented 2012. It came to supersede the state-based syllabus. Now, the state-based syllabus was deemed to be underperforming. We only need to look at our PISA results, Australia's global rankings in OECD, economic and educational comparisons. And someone had to get blamed, so the state curriculum was blamed and the national curriculum was imposed. We can see that teachers in schools are now forced to, whether you're an independent, Catholic or public school, you'll be teaching this curriculum. So you're going to have to make interpretation decisions. You're going to have to take the elaborations and work out how they apply to your particular students, because not all particular students have access to the same resources, whether that's social capital, intellectual capital, or resource capital. And then we've got the science classroom, and the specific lesson plans, assessment, and how you're going to report against that assessment. All of these raise really, profound issues for teachers in the classroom. And they also point to just how loaded a curriculum document is. And yet, if we're looking for a metaphor, a curriculum document really is just like a recipe. It lists the essential ingredients. It lists what you need to deliver, to make your cake or bake your pie. And the pedagogy is the steps involved in putting that pie together. Mixing the flour, beating the egg, fluffing up whatever it is you fluff up, mixing the base, preparing the base, pre-baking the base, the filling, all of these different things. That's your pedagogy. And pedagogy can vary from being student-centred to being explicit instruction. It can vary from being inquiry-based to being teaching facts and knowledge. And in that debate lies the question, what is science? So moving that aside, we can see it's quite a political issue. I did put a little video in there for you from South Australia, which actually indicates a good approach to teaching science and to interpreting the national curriculum, and what makes it different in 2016-17 from how it was in 2010 to 12, the pre-elaboration stage. Raise the notion that there are 3 particular types of curriculum here, and really it's a matter of just becoming over the top of how these curriculum definitions are used. We have the formal curriculum, and let's face it, we are required, if you receive federal funding or state funding, you are required by law to oblige by certain pieces of legislation, and some of those, of course, is the Education Act, based on the Melbourne Convention and everything that emerged from that. So we have a national curricula, and that curricula is formal, but it can be implemented in a range of ways, and your textbook, Gregson, identifies two. One they call process-based and the other content-based. Reggio Emilio, that fabulous play-based curriculum that's come out of Europe. Fantastic. You know, the old notion of bush kindergartens have come back into Australia again now. Somehow we lost that, yet we're the quintessential home of bush kindergartens, because every kindergarten in Australia was a bush kindergarten at one stage. But now they're housed in Denmark and Sweden, and Australian educators have gone over there to study how they work and brought them back here. So again, all part of the Reggio Emilio sort of process of education. Steiner schools, Rudolf Steiner. If you've been fortunate enough to be part of a Steiner school, I'd love to hear from you in the discussion tomorrow. But, you know, in a Steiner school, the first thing you do when you get to school on your first day is make your own chair. And then you make your own desk soon after that. So you actually make your own place in the Steiner world. It's a fascinating process approach to education. The IBO, for those of you not sure of the acronym, it's the International Baccalaureate Organisation. And they have a primary and a secondary stream. The MYP is basically the middle year program, and it's geared towards developing a holistic approach to middle schooling. So at middle schooling, you won't be overweighted with one particular type of curriculum bent or one angle or one curriculum strength above others. You'll be required to develop all of your curriculum areas equally, and that flows through into the diploma certificate at years 11 and 12. The FLC, another acronym, the Flexible Learning Centre, and you have one here in Townsville, a very, very functional one, and it deals with kids who've actually fallen through traditional schooling, kids who may be returning from penal institutions or having served time, or from state custody, or have been away from education for long periods of time, and they come to flexible learning centres because there's an acknowledgement there that standard school processes won't meet the needs of these particular kids. I'd love to hear from you in tomorrow's discussion if you have something to say about that. Content-based, the VET, VET. Anyone who's done a certain diploma program would know that. The HSC, or the Queensland Certificate of Education, whichever state you did in, Victoria Certificate of Education. You know that, for instance, to get into CQU and practice teaching, you have to have done maths and science prerequisites. Next year, they double. You have to do biological and chemical sciences, as well as introductory and intermediate maths. So these are content-based requirements. And the baccalaureate senior diploma, you have to study a foreign language. You have to study English, whether you do it as a foreign language or as a domestic language. You have to do maths, you have to do a science. You have to do philosophy. And you have to write also a 4,000-word essay, a research essay in your final year of study. So there's a very, very strong content process there too, as well as being process-oriented towards developing the whole individual. The interesting area is the hidden curriculum. When we look at schooling, the Anglican schools, the Lutheran schools, basically characterised middle-class and upper-class Australia in its early days, really, you know, from the 1800s to the mid-1800s. And these were children who were getting education at home. They were being homeschooled. There was a strong homeschooling movement. They valued education. And then small schools began to form around the Anglican and Lutheran codes, and the Baptist codes as well. However, there was one group of people out there, and they were a large group, a noisy group, a rabble of a group, the Catholics. And they were running around the back streets of Sydney, committing petty crimes, stealing things, being absent, being half-dressed, often described by some of the Anglicans as heathen. And of course the mandate became, through the courts, is to civilise the heathens, so public schooling and public curriculum were born. It's an interesting notion. Michel Foucault writes a lot about this, about the school having been designed and modelled on the principles of a 17th century French prison. Fascinating stuff. We can also see the hidden curriculum. We do have schools in Australia that preach and practice creationist science above evolutionary science. So it's something definitely to consider when you're looking at this particular module. Now, when we look at the curriculum documents, and the whole purpose of this week is really to learn how to become fluent in reading these curriculum documents. So the ones we're going to focus around really is the contemporary science documents. and the one that we are focusing on is the ACS curriculum. Now, some of you, for instance, will find it difficult to wade through. And so for that reason, we move from comparing different types of curriculums here in Activity 3 to actually using this YouTube guide, for instance, is put up by Akara, and it actually says how to use and read the National Curriculum in Science, because it is a huge document. If you don't find that useful, please try this Science Information Sheet as a resource. It explains the background to the National Curricula and how to read and how to view it. And the whole aim, of course, of this week's activity is to go to the Australian Curriculum website, and even though your textbook covers this in reasonable detail, so you don't need to go to the website, but it's good to see it online and look at the science curriculum and see just how this document is actually laid out. There's a scope and sequence expectation, and this little activity asks you to complete the scope and sequence document. There's a resource list there for you. Please have a go at that. It'd be interesting to see how that turns out for you. We can discuss that as part of tomorrow's online Zoom discussion. And please, any questions, post to the Q&A. The scavenger hunt. Really, the topic of this week's curriculum, the topic of this week's online lecture really is the scavenger hunt. And when we get down to the scavenger hunt, really it's about how the teacher is going to put together these complexities, this thing we call the curriculum. Science, their own perspective on what science may or may not be. Life, their life, the life of their family, the life of their students. The interests, their interest of their students, the lack of interest of their students. And bear in mind, every time a student walks into the room, two students walk in, the student's experience of the past and the student's expectations of the current class. So you've got to bear in mind that it's a fairly loaded curricula as we're going through it. So the ACS is really your bedrock to your pedagogy, and it's your recipe, to how you put the ingredients together. So we get the recipe right, get to know your ingredients, and then the pedagogy, the application of those ingredients, theoretically becomes a little bit easier. I've put a link up there too from South Australia, and it poses science. What is science for? And it's really an elaboration on the new ACS, and it tries to show what's different between now and the curriculum that pre-existed before 2012. And it's really worth a look. This little picture actually on this slide is taken from that particular elaboration. So without much further ado, let's get on to the scavenger activity. I'll just pop that over here on the main screen, and as you can see here, I'll see if I can enlarge a little bit so it makes a little bit more sense. These questions really represent your working understanding of the ACS at this particular point in your study. At week 2 of your course, this is really what you need to know. It's an amazing document. It's huge, it's rich, it can be complex and overwhelming, but what we need to do is create a user perspective on it. So what we've got 3 levels covered. Question 1's answered. We've then got the capabilities. Anything done in science should map onto one of those 7 other capabilities. Okay, remember we're developing a holistic outcome here. The cross-curriculum priorities. You can see the AC was very much developed in a political climate. We see our Indigenous students very much. The history and culture is an aspect of science that we've got to integrate. And bear in mind, not just integrate, but also honour and respect. It's a really important point. Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia is a really rich one as well. Believe it or not, the QSA and the Queensland syllabus is actually taught up the east coast of China. So there are Australian schools delivering up through Asia. So Asian perspectives are very, very essential. And sustainability. Okay, it's one of the key issues in terms of sustainability in science, in life, and in ecosystems. The strands fairly straightforward. The levels or bands, as we can see, really important. You can see that there are 4 sub-strands within science understanding. So it's important that you understand the biological, chemical, earth, and physical. as a human endeavour. Science has a nature and development, and also use and influence. And of course the inquiry skills. And then we've got our 5, what used to be known as the 5E model, but slightly rewritten. What do Year 3s learn? We go see here and learn how to read this document. Some of the elaborations. How to use elaborations, what they mean. What does Year 6s learn? Notice it starts off with the term content description. Okay? Everything will start with content description. Then there'll be elaborations. What does that content mean? Okay, it means investigating the following things. Which strand teaches about the nature of science? And so on. Some really good little content questions. More examples there. What do Year 4s learn? Which strand teaches skills? Okay, obviously inquiry. You can see that there's an element of repetition about the document. And again, it's instantly, when you get to the stage, when you move from being a pre-service teacher to an experienced classroom teacher, and in between. I mean, teaching is an interlanguage. It's made up of various stages of competency where you're beginning, you can feel overwhelmed. It's a real W curve. Things work well one day, they don't work the next. Then you move to a classroom teacher, a young teacher, where you've got your own class and you're growing in confidence, you're growing in competence, you're understanding what it's like to be a teacher. However, you've still got gaps. Now, the Johari window is a fabulous psychological tool which suggests we have an area that's known to ourselves and an area that's not known to ourselves. It also suggests we have an area that's hidden to the public and an area that's hidden from ourselves. So it's a complex little psychological model, but as a young teacher in your Johari window, you are very much in that area of things that are hidden from yourself. And this is why we do things like profiling, is where a senior teacher will come into your classroom and profile your teaching of a lesson. And then you'll sit down with that teacher, and it's not meant to be a critique. The same thing happens when we review your lessons on placement. It's not meant to be a critique of you, but what it is, it's meant to be a critique of how you're developing as a teacher, as a pre-service teacher, or as a young classroom teacher, and identifying the gaps in your practice and then helping you address those with some real strategies and ideas. So please, if you haven't already had a look, have a look at that scavenger hunt document. It really is everything you need to know at this particular point in time, and I do encourage that you have a good look at it, and if you can, not memorize it, but certainly begin to move around it. Know that you've got your descriptor, descriptions, know that they have elaborations, and know that they're connected to strands and substrands. And once you get that sort of structure in your mind, all of a sudden you're starting to feel more capable as a teacher of science, and someone who's going to have to stand up and deliver it to a group of learners. I suggested also one of the activities this week is that we have a look at an actual unit, and we do a plus minus interesting. Now, a PMI comes out of the school of Edward de Bono, and basically says, you know, let's look at something, let's not dismiss it, let's not get overexcited about it, but let's actually look at its 3 dimensions, what's good about it, where it may have gaps or may be weak, and also what's interesting about it, what are the possibilities. Okay, the unit I chose was a Year 3 one. Now, hopefully that suits everyone. It falls somewhere in the middle of the early childhood, up at the top of the early childhood limit, and also somewhere in the middle of the primary profile. So we can look at the Coolit unit, and hopefully the computer will do the right thing here and make the link. Looking good so far, and it's taking us to the QCAA site. Now, the QCAA site, you're right, it says Queensland, and I know not all of you are Queensland before you jump up and down and say, but it's not Queensland. It is, however, F to 10, and anything F to 10 in Queensland is described and designed along the ACS. Okay, it's required, it's mandated by law. So anything F to 10 can be used in any state, and it will meet your curriculum needs. And hence the reason why we're looking at this particular level of curriculum. 11 and 12, no, it wouldn't. There's radically different outcomes in each of the states and approaches. But for anything F to 10, it is a uniform national approach. Now we're starting to get that control component. So you can see this is how it's laid out. Time allocation, frequently used resources. It takes us down here to the sample assessment, what it actually looks like. And here's what I want us to have a look at. Let's review this particular unit and see what it looks like. And as you see, when you get in here, you've got access to quite a few different resources to how they're set out. Let's go and have a look at the assessment. It comes up and it gives you quite a detailed description. It gives you the experimental investigation. Now, the really nice thing about this little unit, I like it because it follows explicitly the constructivist steps, the 5 steps outlined in the curriculum documents. The contents also come quite well done, and as you can see, you can download it as a zip file, and you can also have a look at what some students have done with it in the sample response portfolio, and this helps you in your assessment and your reporting of it. But let's go and have a look at the actual unit itself. And your task here, remember, is to do a plus, a minus, and an interesting. And hopefully you'll come up with more than one of each. So what we've got here, the unit is Cool It. You can see the description. Category, it's a written task. Technique is experimental investigation. Context gives you the context. Gives you the alignment. Connections makes prior connections to the Year 3 plan and shows you where this fits in, so it's justified. So it's scaffolded, it's well built in. Definitions. Okay, in this assessment we've got teacher guidelines and got the equipment necessary, so it's quite explicit. I like that about it. You're not opening up and thinking, what do I need to do? This I like. Science understanding. It's got the strands clearly laid out. It's also got the substrands. Very, very nice and explicit linkages here to other capacities. So it shows you where this unit is embedded and where it also reaches out to other curriculum areas. The achievement standard, how you will assess and report. That's the ultimate overall standard that you will, the global assessment standard against which you report. And here we've got the sequence of learning and some additional resources. And development assessment, that is getting ready for this task. The things that have to be taught. What you need to explore, the explorations and elaborations you need to deal with. The science involves. How you may tackle the process skills. For instance, support students using a simple report format. So you're doing a fair bit of cognitive modelling in there. And a breakdown ultimately of the sections, what the student does, what the teacher does. And you can see in here a very, very explicit skills-based model. You know, I do, you do, we do. Again, I do, you do, we do. And it's all activity-driven and activity-based. Finally, making judgments. And we go back to the standards here. And it gives some direction and some explanation of how you would be expected to report for this particular unit. And again, without saying too much more, I have my own view of it. It gives you some more once again, full of information, and tells you where each of the substrands and strands fit in. And relates to some of the Queensland matrices and the learning continua, and dictates how you'll give feedback to students. So again, I'll close that down. Some of the things I had to say about it, I actually thought it had really good scaffolding over here about heat transfer, flow of solids, liquids and energy. It had the 5-stage approach, the 5 E's, quite well documented. Cognitive scaffolding was clear, planning and conducting was excellent. The testing of predictions and the evaluation and evidence-based decision-making, strong. Good science. I'm not sure they explicated the inquiry skills enough. They could have said a little bit more about what they were doing there, but they were so explicit maybe they didn't have to. Wondering what else you thought might have been missing from it. And interesting, again, good elaborations to other capacities and capabilities, and very, very strong inquiry-based model. PMI, perhaps we can talk about it tomorrow at the Zoom session. Representations. I just want to close the circle here by saying that a curriculum document is largely a representation. It's like a recipe, which is a representation of a cake that's got to be baked yet. A curriculum document is a representation of a learning process that is yet to be conducted. So it can be full of illustrations, demonstrations, analogies, examples, any way that can represent scientific concepts in a user-friendly way. We then come round to this notion of pedagogical content knowledge. And when we get down to our little discussion on pedagogy, we're crossing the threshold here from the what to the science of teaching. Now, pedagogy is the science of teaching children. I mean, the definition, I really need to correct that slightly. Pedagogy relates to children, andragogy relates to adult learners. So there is a slight difference there. But our text, page 72 to 80, gives a really good discussion of this. It takes in the work of Brady and Kennedy, 2010, where they give 3 conditions or dimensions that really understand good pedagogical knowledge. And that's it, promoting high levels of intellectual quality, based on promoting an environment of quality learning, and based on developing and making explicit to students the significance of their work. And Gregson covers Brady and Kennedy quite well on page 72. So we need curriculum knowledge. We need to know how to teach the curriculum. We need to know how to implement the Australian curriculum in the QCAA, or formerly the QSA documents. And we need to integrate content knowledge and subject knowledge. Things like how lights work with a circuit, how computers work. And the next step is to use this knowledge to best teach students for optimal achievement. And here comes pedagogical content knowledge. It's curriculum knowledge plus knowledge about teaching plus content knowledge equals what we call the great teacher. And I've just included a little clip from Monty Python there, if you can follow the hyperlink to it. It should come off the PowerPoint slide. And it's all about the burning of the witch, one of my favourite scenes from Monty Python. Unfortunately, which most of Monty Python things goes horribly wrong. The final task I ask you to do, there's a group of 3 of them actually. Create a table to compare the characteristics of pre-service teachers, early career science teachers, and accomplished science teachers. And I'd like to raise here the notion of cognitive apprenticeship. Now, Dr. John Bain, who used to study with when I was teaching at Griffith University, came up with the notion of cognitive apprenticeship and demonstrated how influential it is in a knowledge community like ours. We come in to perform a particular knowledge task, i.e. teaching, the teaching of science. However, there is a continuum that we go through, and there's 3 clear stages on that. We become a young teacher in our classroom where we're developing the skills, we're demonstrating a lot of positive behaviours, but we also have gaps in our practice. And then ultimately, at the end of that continuum, we become an experienced teacher. And as an experienced teacher, we're able to look back on our practice, and incrementally through the years, we've been able to fill in those gaps by connecting with other peers, by doing professional development, by doing further study, by working with mentor teachers. It's enabled us to do a whole range of catch-up activities so that we do close our own circle and become more experienced teachers. And that's why activity, I want you to think about you as a teacher of science, and hopefully we'll share some of those thoughts tomorrow in the Zoom session, because it really is very much talking about how we imagine ourselves, how we see ourselves as a representation now, and what we can take, what action we can take as a pre-service teacher to enrich that picture. It's a powerful opportunity to reflect. Activity 8, complete analysing a lesson. And I've given you 3 little focuses here. Connectedness. And here's a theory that I really want to elaborate as we go on in this course. George Siemens in 2005 came up with a theory of connectivity. And it's a really interesting model. Because it's the one thing the Australian curriculum in science doesn't deal with, and that's the digital community. How science is largely embedded in digital communities and transported through digital devices and through digital media. So, and it's what connects the community, therefore, is the media they use. So connectedness is an interesting thing. But there's also curriculum connectedness. Is a task connected to the science? Is the pedagogy connected to the content? Is it socially supportive? And is there recognition of difference? And to guide you there, I've given you a link to whole brain teaching, or to an alternate site called Sleek Geeks. And if you do have something that you want to comment on, something you think is pretty special, or pretty funny, or pretty unusual, and you want to guide other people to look at it and comment, please post it to the forums. Okay, so we can all go and have a look and share in a discussion with you about what it is you're looking at. And the final thing, a reminder that science is fun. Week 2, hopefully you're getting into the mood and you're getting into the spirit. You're starting to focus on your own representation. Assessment task number 1, which is 5 weeks of reflection on your experience of teaching science, what science is, what the substrands are, what the strands are, how the elaborations may look, what pictures, what representations would describe those elaborations, how you'll narrate that in your assessment and bring it together and tell that 20 picture, 20 second by 20 picture story. Over to you on that one. I will pause until tomorrow and I will catch up with you in our Zoom session. Thank you.